My husband thought he was clever, abandoning me at Charles de Gaulle Airport to run off with his ex-girlfriend while I watched their plane disappear into the clouds. What he didn't know was that in his rush to escape with her, he'd left behind something very important, his wallet, complete with every credit card he owned. By the time he realized his mistake and called me in a panic, I'd already spent 3 weeks living like royalty in Paris, charging everything to his accounts. But when he demanded I stop and threatened to cancel his cards, I simply smiled and pulled out my own black card. You see, my darling husband had no idea who he'd really married, or how much money I actually had. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of how a woman with her own fortune taught a cheating husband the most expensive lesson of his life. My name is Summer McCullen, 34 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was a senior project manager at a prestigious consulting firm in downtown Chicago. From the outside, everyone probably saw me as living the dream, a successful career, a beautiful penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, and a husband who seemed devoted to our 7-year marriage. Timothy McCullen, 36 years old, worked as a marketing director for a major tech company, and together we appeared to be the perfect power couple that our friends envied and our families proudly showed off at gatherings. But appearances, as I've learned, can be devastatingly deceptive. That morning started like any other as we prepared for what was supposed to be our long-awaited second honeymoon to Paris. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. We'd both been working grueling hours, and I thought this vacation would be the perfect opportunity to reconnect and strengthen our marriage. Timothy had been the one to suggest Paris, insisting we needed something romantic and special to rediscover each other. His words, not mine. I remember standing in our walk-in closet that morning, carefully folding my favorite silk dresses and designer shoes into my luggage. The autumn sunlight streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over everything I had worked so hard to build. My consulting firm had just landed a major contract with a Fortune 500 company, and I was feeling proud of the financial security I'd created for us both. Timothy sat on the edge of our bed, scrolling through his phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Are you excited about the trip?" I asked, zipping up my suitcase and turning to face him with a smile. He looked up quickly, almost startled, then forced a grin. "Of course, babe. It's going to be perfect. Just what we need." Something in his tone felt off, but I pushed the feeling away. I was determined to make this trip work, to use these 2 weeks in Paris to rebuild the intimacy that had been slowly fading from our marriage over the past year. The ride to O'Hare International Airport was unusually quiet. Timothy kept checking his phone every few minutes, his leg bouncing nervously as our Uber driver navigated through Chicago traffic. I attributed his restlessness to work stress. He'd been pulling late nights at the office for weeks, claiming his team was under pressure to meet crucial deadlines. "Once we get to Paris, no work calls, no emails," I said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Just us, good wine, and all those museums you promised to take me to." He squeezed back, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Absolutely, no distractions." At the airport, everything seemed normal at first. We checked in together, went through security side by side, and found our gate with an hour to spare before boarding. Timothy excused himself to grab coffee, and I settled into a comfortable chair to review some final project notes on my laptop, a habit I couldn't break even on vacation. That's when I noticed her. A woman with striking auburn hair and sharp green eyes was standing near the departure board, but her attention wasn't on the flight information. She was staring directly at Timothy, who was still in line at the coffee shop. There was something familiar about her, something that made my stomach clench with unease. Recognition hit me like a physical blow. Hannah Fraser, Timothy's ex-girlfriend from college, the one he'd dated for 3 years before we met, the one he claimed he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. I watched, frozen, as Timothy approached her with 2 coffee cups. They didn't embrace, that would have been too obvious, but the way they looked at each other, the intimate way she touched his arm as she spoke, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a chance encounter. My hands began to shake as I pretended to focus on my laptop screen. 7 years of marriage, and my husband had orchestrated this elaborate charade to bring his ex-girlfriend on what was supposed to be our romantic getaway. The vacation he had insisted we needed. The trip he had planned down to every detail. When our boarding group was called, Timothy returned to where I was sitting, acting perfectly normal. "Ready for Paris, beautiful?" he asked, offering me one of the coffee cups. I took it with steady hands, my consulting training kicking in, the ability to maintain composure under pressure, to think strategically even when emotions threatened to overwhelm. "Ready," I replied, standing up and shouldering my carry-on bag. As we walked toward the gate, I saw Hannah merge into the line, several passengers behind us. She had somehow managed to get on the same flight, probably in a seat Timothy had secretly arranged for her. The planning this must have taken, the lies he must have told, the sheer audacity of bringing another woman on our anniversary trip, it was breathtaking in its cruelty. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Something deep inside me, the part that had built a successful career by staying calm under pressure and analyzing situations before acting, told me to wait, to observe, to understand exactly what I was dealing with before making any moves. As we boarded the plane and settled into our seats, Timothy's phone buzzed constantly. He claimed it was work emergencies that couldn't wait, but I caught glimpses of text messages that had nothing to do with marketing campaigns. Messages that made my blood run cold as I realized this betrayal ran deeper than just bringing his ex on our vacation. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, as I pretended to sleep while Timothy whispered into his phone, I made a decision. Whatever game my husband thought he was playing, whatever elaborate plan he had constructed to humiliate and deceive me, I was going to turn it against him. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. The plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport on a crisp October morning, and Paris greeted us with overcast skies that seemed to mirror my darkening mood. As we disembarked, Timothy's behavior became even more erratic. He kept checking his phone, his eyes darting around the terminal as if he was looking for someone or trying to avoid being seen. "The hotel shuttle should be here soon," he said, though I noticed he hadn't actually called to confirm anything. "Why don't you grab our luggage from the carousel while I handle the transportation?" I nodded, playing along with whatever script he had prepared. Of course, the Hotel Plaza Athénée, right? We had spent months planning this trip, or at least I thought we had. Now I wondered how much of it was real. "Actually," Timothy said, his voice taking on a strained tone, "there's been a slight change of plans. Work called during the flight. There's an emergency back in Chicago, and I need to catch the next flight back." I stared at him, watching as he delivered this obvious lie with the practiced ease of someone who had been planning it for weeks. "An emergency? Timothy, we just landed. We haven't even left the airport." I know. It's terrible timing." He was already pulling out his phone, pretending to check flight schedules. "But this client could make or break my career. You understand, right? You've had to make similar sacrifices for your consulting work." The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. He was using my own dedication to my career as justification for his betrayal. "What about our hotel reservations? Our dinner tonight at Le Meurice?" "You should stay," he said quickly. "Enjoy Paris on your own. It'll be like a solo adventure. Very modern and independent of you." That's when I saw her again. Hannah Fraser was standing near the International Departures Board, her auburn hair catching the terminal's fluorescent lights. She was wearing a designer coat I recognized, Burberry, the same one Timothy had supposedly bought for his sister's birthday last month. A sister who lived in Seattle, and hadn't spoken to Timothy in 2 years. "Timothy," I said slowly, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me, "is there something you need to tell me?" For just a moment his mask slipped. I saw panic flash across his face before he recovered. "What do you mean? I just explained about work." "I see Hannah over there." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. "Hannah. That's impossible. What would she be doing in Paris?" "You tell me." Timothy's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it reflexively. I caught a glimpse of the message, "Gate B47. Hurry." Everything clicked into place. The work emergency was just an excuse to catch a flight with his ex-girlfriend, probably to some romantic destination they had planned together. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. While I was busy working late nights to pay for this very trip, the audacity was staggering. I can explain, he started. But I held up my hand. Don't. Just don't. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, quickly checking our joint account. Timothy handled most of our shared expenses, but I had always maintained my own separate accounts, a habit from my consulting days when I learned to never fully depend on anyone else financially. Summer, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. I looked him directly in the eyes, seeing a stranger where my husband used to be. You've been planning this for months. The Paris trip was never about us. It was about setting up the perfect scenario to abandon me in a foreign country while you ran off with her. He didn't deny it. That silence was more damning than any confession. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I used with difficult clients. You're going to go to gate B47 and catch whatever flight you have planned with Hannah, and I'm going to stay in Paris exactly as you suggested. Relief flooded his face. He actually thought I was making this easy for him. But Timothy, I smiled, the kind of smile that had intimidated corporate executives across Chicago. I hope you packed light. What do you mean? I gestured toward his carry-on bag. Your wallet. Did you remember to pack your wallet? His hand flew to his jacket pocket, then to his pants pockets, then back to his jacket. The look of growing horror on his face was almost comical. You left it on the plane, I said helpfully, pulling his leather wallet from my purse. It fell out when you were reaching for your phone. I picked it up, thinking I was being a helpful wife. Timothy stared at the wallet in my hands, like it was a live grenade. Summer, give me my wallet. Of course. I opened it up, making a show of checking the contents. Let's see, American Express Black Card, Visa Platinum, MasterCard World Elite, and oh, this lovely Chase Sapphire Reserve, all with such impressive credit limits. Summer, you know what the ironic thing is, I continued, ignoring his increasingly frantic tone. I actually make more money than you do. My consulting firm's profit-sharing bonus alone this year was more than your entire salary, but I let you handle our joint expenses because I thought it made you feel good to be the provider. Timothy's phone buzzed again. Another message from Hannah, probably wondering where he was. Gate B47 would start boarding soon. I'll make you a deal, I said, slipping his wallet back into my purse. You go catch your flight with Hannah. Enjoy your romantic getaway, wherever you're planning to take her, and I'll mail your wallet back to you, eventually. You can't just steal my credit cards. I'm not stealing them. I'm temporarily misplacing them. There's a difference. I shouldered my carry-on bag and started walking toward the baggage claim. Oh, and Timothy, you might want to call your mother to pick you up when you land back in Chicago. Tell her to look for the woman with auburn hair. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to meet Hannah. Behind me, I heard Timothy curse under his breath as he realized exactly what I had just done to him. His flight was boarding, his girlfriend was waiting, and he had no access to any of his money. As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete and utter control. The taxi ride from Charles de Gaulle to central Paris gave me 45 minutes to think, and thinking was what I did best. As the French countryside gave way to the elegant architecture of the city, I methodically began piecing together the puzzle of my husband's betrayal. Timothy's phone had been buzzing constantly during our flight. But it wasn't just Hannah he was coordinating with. I remembered glimpses of names I didn't recognize. Carter, Aaron, Nick, male names that suggested this operation was larger than just a romantic escape. My consulting background had taught me to recognize patterns, and the pattern here pointed to something more calculated than a simple affair. I pulled out my own phone and opened my Notes app, creating what I mentally labeled Operation Clarity. Years of managing complex corporate projects had trained me to document everything, and this situation would be no different. First, I reviewed our joint finances. Timothy handled most of our shared accounts, but I had always maintained access to view transactions. As the taxi wound through Parisian streets, I scrolled through months of credit card statements with fresh eyes, looking for irregularities I had previously dismissed as work expenses. There it was, March 15th. A $1,200 charge at a high-end restaurant in Chicago, on a Tuesday night when Timothy claimed he was working late. April 3rd, $800 purchase at Tiffany & Company. The same week he told me his company was implementing a gift moratorium due to budget cuts. May 20th, a $2,300 charge at the Four Seasons, supposedly for a client dinner that I now realized never involved any clients at all. The pattern became clearer with each transaction. Timothy hadn't just been having an affair with Hannah, he had been systematically lying to me for months, using our shared resources to fund an entirely separate relationship, while I worked overtime to increase our family income. My phone rang, interrupting my analysis. Timothy's name flashed on the screen. Summer, we need to talk. I assume you made your flight, I asked pleasantly, watching the Eiffel Tower come into view through the taxi window. Don't play games with me, I need my wallet back. I'm sure you do. How's Hannah enjoying her romantic adventure? Silence. Then, this isn't what you think it is. Really? Because what I think is that you planned an elaborate scheme to abandon your wife in a foreign country so you could run away with your college ex-girlfriend using money from our joint accounts. Am I wrong? Another pause. Look, Hannah and I, it's complicated. But this doesn't have to ruin everything between us. We can work this out. The audacity was breathtaking. Where are you right now, Timothy? That's not important. Rome? Barcelona? Somewhere romantic where you plan to propose to her with the ring you probably bought with my bonus money. His sharp intake of breath told me I had hit close to the mark. I want my credit cards back, Summer. I'm serious. I'm sure you are. Those must be expensive. All those romantic dinners and luxury hotels. Tell me, how long have you been planning this? Since Hannah moved back to Chicago last year? Or did you two reconnect even earlier than that? The taxi pulled up to the Hotel Plaza Athénée, and I stepped out into the crisp Parisian air. The irony wasn't lost on me. Timothy had chosen one of the most expensive hotels in Paris for our second honeymoon, probably planning to cancel our reservation at the last minute and strand me with nowhere to stay. Summer, just tell me where you are, and we can figure this out like adults. I'm at the Plaza Athénée, checking into the suite you booked for our anniversary, the one you probably planned to cancel after you abandoned me. I walked through the hotel's elegant lobby, noting the way the staff immediately recognized luxury when they saw it. My designer luggage and confident demeanor marked me as someone who belonged here. You can't afford that hotel on your own. There it was, the assumption that had probably fueled this entire plan. Timothy genuinely believed I was financially dependent on him, that abandoning me in Paris would leave me helpless and desperate. He had no idea about the separate investment accounts I maintained, the consulting contracts I handled independently, or the substantial inheritance from my grandmother that I had never bothered to mention. Bonjour, I said to the concierge, switching to the French I had learned during my MBA program abroad. I have a reservation under McCullen. Ah oui, Madame McCullen, the presidential suite. We've been expecting you and your husband. Change of plans, I said smoothly. It will just be me for the duration of the stay, and I'd like to extend the reservation for 2 additional weeks. Timothy was still talking on the phone, his voice becoming increasingly agitated. Summer, are you listening to me? I'm trying to explain. Timothy, I interrupted, accepting the keycard from the concierge with a smile. I need to go. I have a very important call to make. What call? I'm calling your mother. She should know that when she picks you up at O'Hare tonight, the woman with you won't be her daughter-in-law. The silence on the other end was deafening. Enjoy your flight, I said sweetly, and hung up. As the elevator carried me toward the top floor of one of Paris's most prestigious hotels, I opened my contacts and scrolled to Margaret McCullen. Timothy's mother had always been fond of me, often commenting on how proud she was that her son had married such an accomplished woman. She was also incredibly traditional, and had very strong opinions about marriage, loyalty, and family values. This conversation was going to be very interesting, but first I had some shopping to do. After all, if I was going to be staying in Paris for 3 weeks instead of 2, I would need an entirely new wardrobe, and I knew exactly which credit cards I was going to use to pay for it. The The presidential suite at the Plaza Athénée was everything I had imagined and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower, while the marble bathroom was larger than most people's bedrooms. As I unpacked my luggage in the walk-in closet, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Timothy had chosen this suite to impress me before his grand betrayal, and now I would be enjoying it alone while he scrambled to explain his situation to Hannah without access to any money. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I hung up on Timothy, but I ignored it. Instead, I ordered room service, Dom Perignon and fresh oysters, and settled into the suite's living room to make my strategic plan. The first step was information gathering. I opened my laptop and began researching Timothy's recent activities with the methodical approach I used for corporate investigations. His social media accounts, which I had access to, revealed a pattern of carefully orchestrated posts designed to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage while concealing his double life. But it was his email account that provided the real treasure trove. Timothy had always been careless with digital security, using the same password for everything, habit I had mentioned numerous times, but he had never bothered to change. Within minutes, I was reading through months of correspondence that painted a picture far more elaborate than I had initially suspected. The emails revealed that Hannah wasn't just a rekindled romance, she was part of what appeared to be a coordinated effort involving several of Timothy's college friends. Carter Holt, who worked in finance, had been helping Timothy move money into offshore accounts. Aaron Turner, a lawyer, had been providing advice on asset protection and divorce strategy. The scope of their planning was breathtaking. They had been preparing for Timothy to leave me for over 8 months, carefully positioning assets and building a support network for his new life. But the most damning evidence was a draft email Timothy had never sent, saved in his drafts folder dated just 2 weeks ago. Hannah, everything is falling into place perfectly. Summer has no idea about the accounts Carter helped me set up, and Aaron confirmed that with the prenup technicality he found, she won't be entitled to any of the assets I've moved. The Paris trip will be the perfect setup, abandon her there, come back with you, and by the time she returns to Chicago, I'll have filed for divorce and frozen everything. She'll be too humiliated and financially desperate to fight back effectively. This is going to be easier than we thought. I read the email 3 times, feeling my anger crystallize into something much more dangerous: clarity. Timothy hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had orchestrated an elaborate financial coup designed to leave me destitute and humiliated while he started a new life with Hannah and a significant portion of our shared wealth. What he didn't know was that the prenup technicality Aaron had found was meaningless, because the majority of my assets were in accounts Timothy knew nothing about. My consulting firm's partnership shares, my investment portfolio, and my grandmother's inheritance were all protected under structures I had established years before our marriage. I closed the laptop and reached for Timothy's wallet, extracting his American Express black card. If Timothy wanted to play financial warfare, I was going to give him a master class in economic strategy. The next morning, I began what would later become the most therapeutic shopping spree of my life. I started at Galeries Lafayette, where I purchased an entirely new wardrobe, Chanel suits, Hermès handbags, Louboutin shoes. Each purchase was methodical and purposeful. I wasn't shopping out of emotion, I was making strategic investments in my new life while simultaneously draining the accounts Timothy thought he controlled. At Cartier, I bought a vintage watch that cost more than most people's cars. At Louis Vuitton, I commissioned custom luggage with my initials, not SM for Summer McCullen but SF for Summer Fraser, reclaiming my maiden name. The irony that I was now using the same surname as Timothy's mistress wasn't lost on me, but I had been a Fraser long before Hannah existed in our lives. Between shopping excursions, I enjoyed Paris like I never had before. I dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, booked private tours of museums, and enjoyed spa treatments that cost more per hour than most people made in a day. Each experience was charged to Timothy's cards, and each purchase was carefully documented in my growing file of evidence. My phone continued to buzz with increasingly frantic calls from Timothy, but I let them all go to voicemail. The messages evolved from confusion to anger to desperation as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. Summer, you need to stop this immediately. You're running up charges that we can't afford. This is theft, Summer. I'm going to call the police. Hannah and I are stuck in Barcelona with no money. You're being vindictive and childish. The final message, left on day 3 of my Parisian adventure, revealed just how completely his plan had collapsed. My mother knows everything, she's furious. Hannah's parents found out and they're threatening to cut her off completely. You've ruined everything we worked for. Just, please, can we talk like reasonable adults? I deleted the message and returned to my afternoon at the Louvre, where I had just purchased a private after-hours tour that cost more than Timothy's monthly salary. Reasonable adults, I reflected, didn't abandon their spouses in foreign countries while attempting to steal their assets. That evening, as I enjoyed a bottle of 1995 Chateau d'Yquem on my private balcony overlooking the Eiffel Tower, I finally decided it was time to return Timothy's call. After all, I had been in Paris for 3 days, and it was only fair to let him know how much I was enjoying his credit cards. The conversation we were about to have would change everything. Timothy answered on the first ring, his voice tight with desperation. "Summer, thank God, we need to talk." "Good evening, Timothy," I said pleasantly, swirling the golden wine in my glass as the Eiffel Tower sparkled to life in the distance. "How's Barcelona? I hope you and Hannah are enjoying your romantic getaway." "Cut the act, Summer. You know exactly what you're doing, and it needs to stop. Now." "I'm not sure what you mean. I'm simply enjoying Paris, just as you suggested. In fact, I should thank you, this has been the most liberating experience of my life." "You've spent over $40,000 in 3 days." His voice cracked with panic. 40,000, Summer. That's more than most people make in a year." I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I had been meticulously tracking every purchase. "Actually, it's $42,637. But who's counting?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "Let's see," I continued, reading from my list with the same tone I used to present quarterly reports. There was the Chanel jacket, 4,000. The Hermès bag, 8,000. The private dinner at Le Miras, 3,000. Oh, and yesterday's spa day was particularly lovely. Did you know a full-body diamond facial costs $1,500? I didn't, but your American Express certainly did. You're insane. This is theft, pure and simple. Is it? Because legally speaking, I'm still your wife using cards that have my name on them as an authorized user. I checked with Aaron Turner's law firm this morning. Lovely receptionist, by the way. She was very helpful in explaining spousal financial rights during marital separation. Timothy's sharp intake of breath told me he understood the implication. I had contacted his own accomplice's law firm for legal advice. You contacted Aaron? I contacted his firm, yes. Turns out Aaron's been quite busy lately, helping various clients with asset protection strategies. Fascinating work, really. Though I have to say, his advice about prenuptial agreements seems somewhat outdated. Summer, listen to me. No, Timothy, you listen to me. My voice took on the steel edge that had intimidated corporate executives across 3 continents. I found your draft email, the one where you detailed your entire plan to abandon me in Paris, steal our shared assets, and leave me too humiliated and financially desperate to fight back effectively. Your words, not mine. The silence stretched so long I wondered if he had hung up. That email it wasn't what it seemed. Really? Because it seemed like a detailed blueprint for financial fraud and emotional abuse. But perhaps I misunderstood. Perhaps when you wrote about the prenup technicality that would leave me with nothing, you were speaking hypothetically. How did you? He stopped himself, but it was too late. How did I access your email? The same way I've been accessing all your accounts for years, Timothy. You use the same password for everything. Hannah 2019. The year she moved back to Chicago. Quite romantic, actually. I could practically hear him calculating the damage, realizing how much I now knew about his carefully constructed deception. Look, maybe we got carried away with the planning, but that doesn't mean carried away. I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. Timothy, You organized a conspiracy involving multiple people to defraud your wife and abandon her in a foreign country. That's not getting carried away. That's criminal. You can't prove anything. Can't I? Because I have screenshots of every email, every bank transfer Carter helped you make, every piece of legal advice Aaron provided. I have hotel receipts for your previous trips with Hannah, credit card statements showing purchases for another woman, and a very interesting paper trail of your attempts to move marital assets into accounts you thought I couldn't access. The panic in his breathing was audible now. But here's the beautiful irony, Timothy. All of your planning, all of this elaborate scheme to leave me financially devastated, it was based on a fundamental miscalculation. What do you mean? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights of Paris. You assumed I was financially dependent on you. You assumed that without access to our joint accounts, I would be helpless. You assumed that a woman who let her husband handle the household finances must not have any money of her own. Summer, tomorrow morning I'm canceling my use of your credit cards, I said calmly. Not because you're asking me to, and not because I can't afford to continue my Parisian adventure, but because I'm tired of using your money when I have so much more of my own. The line went completely silent. You see, darling husband, while you were busy plotting to steal our shared assets, you never bothered to learn about the assets that were never shared to begin with. The silence on Timothy's end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. I could practically hear his mind racing, trying to process what I had just revealed. What are you talking about? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I settled back into the plush armchair, savoring this moment I had been building toward for 3 days. Tell me, Timothy, in all your careful planning with Carter and Aaron, did you ever actually investigate my financial situation, or did you just assume that because I let you handle our joint household expenses, I didn't have any independent wealth? Summer, I know everything about our finances. Do you? Did you know about my grandmother's trust fund, the one that matured when I turned 30, $22 million, Timothy, just sitting in investment accounts you've never seen? His sharp intake of breath was audible even across the international connection. Did you know about my consulting firm partnership shares? I own 18% of Morrison & Associates, Timothy. Last year's distribution alone was more than you make in 3 years. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? When was the last time you actually asked me about my work beyond polite dinner conversation? When did you ever show interest in the deals I close, or the contracts I negotiate? I took another sip of wine, enjoying the way the golden liquid caught the light. You saw me as the supportive wife who made good money, but was ultimately dependent on your financial management. You never bothered to look deeper. The sound of Timothy's breathing was becoming increasingly labored. How much money do you actually have? Enough that your little scheme to leave me financially desperate was never going to work. In fact, Timothy, I make approximately 4 times what you do annually. I just never felt the need to emasculate you with that information. 4 times. His voice cracked. Conservative estimate. Some years it's been closer to 6 times, depending on my performance bonuses and investment returns. I stood up and walked to the suite's marble bathroom, catching my reflection in the ornate mirror. Do you want to know the really amusing part? I could have bought Hannah anything she wanted. I could have given you both the lifestyle you were trying to steal from me, but instead of communicating like adults, you chose deception and fraud. We didn't know. Of course you didn't. Because knowing would have required treating me as an equal partner in our marriage, instead of a convenient accessory to your life. I returned to the balcony, where the Parisian night air carried the distant sounds of the city. Now let me tell you what's going to happen next. Summer, please. Tomorrow morning, I'm switching to my own credit cards for the remainder of my extended Parisian vacation. Not because I'm concerned about your finances, but because I'm done subsidizing your lifestyle with purchases you'll eventually have to pay for.
Extended vacation?
Oh yes. I've decided to stay another 2 weeks. Paris in October is absolutely magical, and I've never had the opportunity to truly enjoy it without worrying about someone else's schedule or preferences. I paused, letting that sink in. I've booked a penthouse apartment in the 7th arrondissement, right near the Eiffel Tower. Much more private than a hotel. You can't just, Summer, we need to talk about this properly. Face to face. Do we? Because it seems to me that you made your choice when you left me at Charles de Gaulle Airport. You chose Hannah. You chose your elaborate escape plan. You chose to view me as an obstacle to be overcome, rather than a partner to be respected. Timothy's voice took on a pleading tone I had never heard before. It doesn't have to be this way. We can work this out. Hannah and I, it's complicated, but it doesn't mean our marriage has to end. I laughed, and the sound surprised me with its genuine amusement. Timothy, are you seriously suggesting that I should welcome you back after discovering your plot to defraud me? That I should forgive the months of lies, the financial manipulation, the complete betrayal of our marriage vows? People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy that took months to plan. You didn't accidentally fall into Hannah's arms, Timothy. You systematically rebuilt a relationship with her while lying to me every single day. What do you want from me? I don't want anything from you anymore, Timothy. That's the point. I finished the last of my wine, setting the crystal glass down on the balcony table. But I am curious about one thing. Did you really think abandoning me in Paris would break me? Did you actually believe that a woman who built a successful consulting career and managed complex international projects would crumble because her husband left her in one of the world's most beautiful cities? He struggled for words. I thought you'd be scared. Alone in a foreign country without money. There it is, I said softly. You thought I was weak. Summer, that's not. Timothy started, but I cut him off. Actually, before we continue this conversation, there's something you should know. I called your mother yesterday. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, you what? I called Margaret. Lovely woman, your mother. We had such an interesting conversation. I could practically feel Timothy's panic radiating through the phone connection. She was so excited to hear from me, especially when I told her about our wonderful trip to Paris. What exactly did you tell her? The truth, Timothy. I told her that you had to fly back early for work, and that she should be at the airport to pick up you and your traveling companion when you landed. You didn't. I was very specific about the traveling companion. Auburn hair, green eyes, about 5'6". I even mentioned that she was wearing that lovely Burberry coat you bought her. Your mother was so curious about who this mystery woman might be. Timothy's breathing became audibly ragged. Summer, you have no idea what you've done, don't I? Let me paint you a picture of how that airport reunion went. I settled back into my chair, enjoying this more than I probably should have. Your mother, standing in arrivals with her usual welcome sign, probably wearing that blue dress she saves for special occasions. And then you walk through customs with Hannah, both of you expecting some grand romantic beginning to your new life together. She's my mother, Summer. She raised me. She'll understand, will she? Because Margaret McCullen spent 20 minutes on the phone with me yesterday, explaining how proud she was that her son had married a woman with traditional values and proper respect for marriage. She mentioned several times how disgusted she was with modern couples who don't take their vows seriously. I paused, letting him absorb the full implications. She also mentioned how much she was looking forward to grandchildren from us, and how she'd been praying that our Paris trip would help us reconnect as a godly married couple. Very traditional, your mother. Oh God, Timothy whispered. Yes, I imagine that's exactly what she said when she saw you with Hannah, though probably with a few more colorful expressions. Margaret always struck me as someone who could deliver a devastating lecture when properly motivated. You destroyed my family relationships just to get revenge. I didn't destroy anything, Timothy. I simply told your mother the truth about your travel arrangements. What happened after that was entirely a consequence of your own choices. I stood up and walked back inside the suite, admiring the fresh flowers the hotel staff had delivered that afternoon. Though I did receive a very interesting phone call from Margaret this morning. What did she say? She wanted to apologize for your behavior, and to let me know that you and Hannah are currently staying in a motel outside Chicago, because she refused to let either of you into her house. I couldn't suppress a small smile. Apparently she had quite a lot to say about sons who abandon their wives for painted hussies, her words, not mine. Timothy was quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. She cut me off, financially, everything. The trust fund she was managing for me, the down payment she'd promised for our next house, the partnership opportunity at her friend's company. She said I was dead to her until I came to my senses and begged my wife's forgiveness. That sounds like Margaret. She always was very clear about her values. Hannah's family found out too, he continued, his voice growing smaller. Her parents saw us at the airport. They're threatening to disown her completely. They're old-fashioned Catholics, Summer. They think she's a homewrecker, isn't she? This wasn't supposed to happen this way. We had a plan. Your plan was flawed from the beginning, Timothy. It was based on lies, deception, and a fundamental misunderstanding of who you were dealing with. I moved to the suite's dining table, where I had spread out printouts of all the evidence I'd gathered. Did you really think you could orchestrate such an elaborate betrayal without consequences? I thought you'd be hurt, maybe angry, but that eventually you'd move on. Find someone new. We never intended for it to destroy everything. You intended to steal marital assets and abandon me in a foreign country, Timothy. What exactly did you think the outcome would be? Another long pause. I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. No, you weren't. And now you're stranded in a Chicago motel with a woman whose family wants nothing to do with her, while your own mother considers you dead to her. All because you couldn't have an honest conversation about being unhappy in our marriage. The irony was almost poetic. Timothy had tried to destroy my life, and ended up destroying his own instead. Timothy, I said, settling into the suite's leather chair with my laptop open, before we finish this conversation, I think you should know exactly how much I've discovered about your little conspiracy. What do you mean? I mean Carter Holt and Aaron Turner, your college buddies who helped you plan this elaborate scheme. I pulled up the screenshots I had taken of Timothy's email correspondence. Did you really think I wouldn't find the email chains detailing how Carter was going to help you move assets offshore while Aaron provided legal cover for your divorce strategy? The silence on Timothy's end was deafening. I particularly enjoyed the email where Carter calculated that you could extract approximately 60% of our shared wealth before I would notice, assuming I was financially naive like most wives. I scrolled through my notes, and Aaron's detailed analysis of how to exploit what he thought was a loophole in our prenuptial agreement, which by the way doesn't actually exist. Summer, please. Oh, but the best part was discovering that this wasn't your first rodeo, was it, Timothy? Carter's been helping other friends execute similar schemes. There's a whole network of you, isn't there? Men who think they can systematically defraud their wives and disappear into new lives. I heard what sounded like Timothy slumping into a chair. How could you possibly know about the others? Because Carter keeps very detailed records, and he's not nearly as clever with digital security as he thinks he is. I opened another file on my laptop. There's Marcus Webb, who used Carter's services to hide assets before divorcing his wife of 15 years. David Chen, who moved his entire business offshore with Carter's help before abandoning his pregnant wife. And my personal favorite, Robert Klein, who actually tried to fake his own death with Aaron's legal assistance. You can't prove any of that, can't I? Because I've been in contact with a very interesting investigative journalist at the Chicago Tribune. Samantha Wells specializes in financial fraud cases, and she's fascinated by what appears to be an organized network of spousal asset theft. Timothy's breathing became audible again. You wouldn't. I already have, Timothy. This morning I provided Samantha with copies of all the email correspondence, financial records, and legal documents I've accumulated. She's particularly interested in the pattern of behavior and the way your little network has been operating. That's private correspondence. You can't just, I can and I did. Amazing what you can accomplish when you actually have legal representation from a firm that specializes in financial crimes. I paused, enjoying the moment. Did I mention I've retained Morrison, Hartley and Associates? They're the ones who handled the Brennan embezzlement case last year. Very thorough. You hired lawyers? The best money can buy, Timothy. Which, as we've established, I have plenty of. I closed the laptop and moved back to the balcony, where the evening lights of Paris created a magical backdrop for this conversation. They're very interested in your case, particularly the interstate nature of the conspiracy and the use of electronic communications to plan the fraud. Timothy was quiet for almost a minute before asking, "What do you want, Summer?" "I want justice, Timothy. Not just for me, but for all the women your little network has victimized." I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I had been tracking the other cases. Marcus Webb's ex-wife, Jennifer, has been working 3 jobs to support her children since he disappeared with their savings. David Chen's wife, Linda, had to move back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent after he cleaned out their accounts. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt." "You absolutely meant for people to get hurt, Timothy. That was the entire point. You wanted to cause maximum financial and emotional damage while protecting yourselves from consequences." My voice hardened. "What you didn't count on was one of your victims having the resources and intelligence to fight back." "So what happens now?" Now the FBI gets involved. Because Carter's offshore banking activities constitute wire fraud. Aaron's legal advice crosses state lines, and your conspiracy involves multiple jurisdictions. I sat down at the suite's elegant writing desk, where I had been organizing my evidence for the past 3 days. "I've already been contacted by a federal investigator who specializes in financial crimes. Agent Rodriguez is very interested in your case." "The FBI?" Timothy's voice cracked. "Summer, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. Did you think you could commit federal crimes and avoid federal consequences?" I opened my laptop again, scrolling through the correspondence with law enforcement. "Agent Rodriguez estimates that your network has stolen over $3 million from spouses across 7 states. That's not a domestic dispute, Timothy. That's organized crime." The weight of what I had just revealed seemed to crush whatever fight Timothy had left in him. "Summer," Timothy's voice was barely a whisper now, "you have to understand, we never thought it would go this far. It was supposed to be simple." "Simple?" I interrupted, looking out at the glittering lights of Paris spread below me. "Timothy, you organized a multi-state conspiracy to defraud multiple women of millions of dollars. In what universe is that simple? We wanted out, all of us. We felt trapped in marriages that weren't working, and you thought you could steal your way to freedom instead of having honest conversations about your problems." I pulled out the folder where I had organized all the evidence. "Do you want to know what Carter told Agent Rodriguez during his interview yesterday?" "Carter talked to the FBI?" "Oh yes. Apparently, federal agents are very persuasive when they show up at your office with evidence of wire fraud and conspiracy charges." I flipped through my notes. Carter was quite forthcoming about the entire operation once he realized the magnitude of what he was facing. Timothy made a sound that might have been a sob. "What did he say?" "Everything, Timothy. The offshore accounts, the legal strategies, the network of participants, the timeline of your planning. He provided a complete breakdown of every scheme he helped orchestrate over the past 3 years." I paused, letting that sink in. "He also mentioned that you were planning to recruit more participants after successfully executing your plan with me. That's not true, isn't it?" Because Carter had emails discussing how my case would serve as a proof of concepts for targeting high-earning women specifically. "Apparently, you thought wives with substantial incomes would be easier marks because they'd be more trusting of their husband's financial management." The silence stretched so long I wondered if Timothy had fainted. "Aaron's been arrested," I continued matter-of-factly. "Turns out providing legal advice for criminal conspiracies violates several professional ethics codes, not to mention federal law. The Illinois State Bar is reviewing his license, and he's facing charges in multiple jurisdictions." "Arrested?" Timothy's voice cracked completely. "This morning, Agent Rodriguez said he went quietly, though he did try to claim attorney-client privilege, until they explained that privilege doesn't cover criminal conspiracies." I took a sip of water from the crystal glass on my table. "His wife filed for divorce this afternoon. Apparently, she had no idea about his extracurricular activities either." "Oh God, what have we done? You've systematically destroyed multiple families while attempting to enrich yourselves through fraud and theft," I replied calmly. "But the consequences are just beginning, Timothy." "What do you mean?" "I mean Hannah's father called me yesterday." I let that statement hang in the air like a sword. Turns out Robert Frazier is a retired federal prosecutor who takes a very dim view of men who manipulate his daughter into participating in criminal activities. Timothy made a choking sound. Hannah's father is a federal prosecutor, retired, but with excellent connections throughout the justice system. He was particularly interested when I explained how you had convinced Hannah to participate in a conspiracy to defraud your wife. I smiled, remembering the satisfaction in Mr. Frazier's voice. He's offered to testify against you if this case goes to trial. She didn't know about the financial part, didn't she? Because Agent Rodriguez found text messages between you and Hannah discussing the offshore accounts and the timeline for accessing the money. She was fully aware that you were stealing marital assets, Timothy. The sound of Timothy's labored breathing filled the silence. There's something else you should know, I continued, pulling out another document. The Chicago Tribune is running a front-page story tomorrow morning about the conspiracy. Samantha Wells has been very thorough in her investigation. A newspaper story. Suburban marriage fraud ring exposed by victims investigation. I read from the advance copy Samantha had sent me. It details the entire network, names all the participants, and explains how wives across multiple states were systematically targeted for financial fraud. Your photo is on the front page, Timothy. My job. Your former job. The tech company fired you this morning after the FBI contacted them about your criminal activities, something about not wanting employees who commit federal crimes. I checked my notes. They also mentioned that several clients specifically requested you be removed from their accounts once the story broke. This can't be happening, but it is happening, Timothy. And tomorrow, when that newspaper hits every doorstep in Chicago, everyone will know exactly what kind of man you really are. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the late evening traffic flow along the sign. Your neighbors, your colleagues, Hannah's friends, your mother's bridge club, everyone will know that Timothy McCullen is a federal criminal who abandoned his wife in Paris to steal her money. The complete silence from Timothy's end told me he was finally beginning to understand the scope of what he had lost. Timothy, I said gently, are you still there? I'm here. His voice was hollow, defeated. Summer, I don't know what to say. There's nothing left to say, is there? You gambled everything on a plan that was doomed from the start, and now you're facing the consequences. I moved to the suite's elegant sitting area, where I had laid out all the legal documents my attorneys had prepared. But there is one more thing you should know, before we end this conversation. What? I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning. My lawyers have prepared all the paperwork, and given the criminal nature of your actions, it should be quite straightforward. I picked up the divorce petition, scanning the terms my legal team had crafted. Under Illinois law, criminal fraud during marriage constitutes grounds for fault-based divorce, which means you forfeit any claim to marital property. You're taking everything. I'm taking what's mine, Timothy. The house is in my name. I bought it with my inheritance money before we married. The investment accounts you never knew about remain mine. The business assets from my consulting firm were never marital property. I paused, letting him process this. What I'm leaving you with is exactly what you contributed to our marriage, your personal debt, your legal fees, and your criminal record. Summer, please. I know I made mistakes, but mistakes. I stood up, feeling a surge of the anger I had been keeping carefully controlled. Timothy, you didn't make mistakes. You made deliberate, calculated choices over the course of months. You chose to lie to me every single day. You chose to steal marital assets. You chose to abandon me in a foreign country. Those weren't mistakes, they were crimes. But we were married for 7 years. That has to count for something. It does count for something. It counts as 7 years of my life that I wasted believing I was married to a man of integrity. I walked back to the balcony, needing the cool night air to center myself. Do you want to know what the worst part is, Timothy? What? If you had simply come to me and said you were unhappy, if you had asked for a divorce like an adult,
it would have been generous.
I would have made sure you were financially stable.
It might have even helped you start over.
My voice softened with genuine sadness. I loved you, Timothy. Even when our marriage was struggling, I still loved the man I thought you were.
I loved you too.
No, you didn't. You loved the convenience I provided, You loved having a successful wife who made you look good at corporate events and social gatherings. You loved the financial security I brought to our marriage. I gripped the balcony railing, looking out at the Seine flowing peacefully below. But you never loved me enough to treat me with honesty or respect. The silence stretched between us, filled with 7 years of shared history that had been poisoned by his betrayal. What happens now? Timothy finally asked. Now you face the consequences of your choices. The FBI investigation continues, the divorce proceeds, and you figure out how to rebuild a life from the ashes of what you destroyed. I returned to my chair, suddenly feeling exhausted. Hannah can decide whether she wants to stand by you through federal criminal proceedings, or whether she'd rather find someone who doesn't come with a trail of law enforcement agencies. And you? I finish my vacation in Paris, then return to Chicago to start divorce proceedings. My lawyers estimate it will be finalized within 6 months, given the criminal circumstances. I picked up my wine glass, swirling the remaining golden liquid. After that, I continue building the life I've been creating all along, the one you never bothered to notice. Summer, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am truly sorry for what I put you through. For the first time in our conversation, I heard genuine remorse in his voice, not panic about consequences, not self-pity about his situation, but actual regret for the pain he had caused. I believe you are sorry, Timothy, but being sorry doesn't undo the damage you've done to me, to Hannah, to all the other wives your network victimized. I set down my glass and stood up, ready to end this chapter of my life. Sorry doesn't give back the years I spent believing I was married to someone who respected me. Sorry doesn't erase the humiliation of discovering my husband's elaborate plan to destroy my life. Is there any chance? No, Timothy, there's no chance. What you did killed every feeling I ever had for you except disappointment. I walked toward the suite's bedroom, where I had already laid out my clothes for another day of exploring Paris. Goodbye, Timothy. I hope you find a way to become the man you should have been all along. I hung up the phone and turned it off, finally ready to enjoy the rest of my Parisian adventure, without any interruptions from my former life. The next morning, I woke up in my luxurious suite to the sound of church bells chiming across the city. For the first time in months, I felt truly peaceful. There were no anxious thoughts about Timothy's strange behavior, no nagging suspicions about unexplained expenses, no need to pretend that everything was fine in our marriage. I was free. I ordered breakfast on the balcony, fresh croissants, perfectly brewed coffee, and strawberries that tasted like they had been picked that morning. As I ate, I opened my laptop and began making concrete plans for my new life. The first step was switching from Timothy's credit cards to my own, exactly as I had promised him I would. The transition was seamless. My American Express Centurion card, with its virtually unlimited spending power, replaced Timothy's cards without missing a beat. The hotel staff didn't even blink when I updated my payment information. They were accustomed to wealthy guests who could afford their most expensive accommodations. With my financial independence firmly established, I decided to truly embrace the freedom that Timothy's abandonment had inadvertently given me. I had originally planned to spend our Paris trip visiting the tourist sites Timothy wanted to see, eating at restaurants he had chosen, following an itinerary designed around his preferences. Now, for the first time in years, I could do exactly what I wanted. I started with the Musée Rodin, where I spent 3 hours wandering through gardens filled with sculptures, taking my time to appreciate each piece without anyone rushing me along. Then I visited a small gallery in Montmartre that featured contemporary artists Timothy would have dismissed as pretentious. I bought 2 paintings that spoke to me, not because they matched any existing decor, but because they represented the new aesthetic I wanted to build in my post-Timothy life. That afternoon, I had lunch at a tiny bistro I discovered by accident while wandering through the Latin Quarter. The owner, Marie, was a woman about my age who had left her corporate job 5 years earlier to open the restaurant with her sister. We talked for over an hour about the courage it takes to completely reinvent your life, and she invited me to return for dinner to try her signature bouillabaisse. "You have the look of a woman who is becoming herself again," Marie said as I prepared to leave. "It is a beautiful thing to see." Her words stayed with me as I explored more of the city. I realized she was right. I was becoming myself again, maybe for the first time since I had gotten married. For 7 years, I had been Timothy's wife in addition to being Summer Frazier. I had made compromises, adjusted my preferences, and gradually diminished parts of myself to maintain harmony in our relationship. That evening, I returned to Marie's Bistro and enjoyed the most delicious meal I had eaten in years. The bouillabaisse was perfection, but more importantly, I was dining alone by choice, reading a book I loved, drinking wine I selected, engaging in conversation with strangers who knew nothing about my past, except what I chose to share. Over the following weeks, I established a routine that felt more authentic than anything I had experienced in years. Mornings were spent at cafes, reading and planning my future. Afternoons were devoted to exploring museums, galleries and neighborhoods at my own pace. Evenings were filled with wonderful meals, theater performances, and cultural experiences that fed my soul. I took a cooking class in the Marais district and learned to make perfect macarons. I spent an entire afternoon at the Musée d'Orsay, studying the Impressionist paintings I had always loved, but never had time to properly appreciate. I even signed up for a watercolor workshop, and discovered a latent artistic talent I had suppressed during my corporate-focused year. Most importantly, I began envisioning what my life would look like when I returned to Chicago. The divorce would be finalized quickly, given Timothy's criminal activities, leaving me free to redesign everything from my living space to my social circle. I started making lists of changes I wanted to make, redecorating the house to reflect my taste, rather than our compromise aesthetic, traveling to places Timothy had never wanted to visit, pursuing hobbies and interests I had set aside for the sake of our marriage. I also began planning my professional future. My consulting firm had been understanding about my extended absence, especially after I explained the circumstances. But I realized that I wanted more than just returning to my old routine. I wanted to use my experience to help other women who might be facing similar situations. The idea came to me while I was sitting in the Tuileries garden, watching couples stroll through the perfectly manicured paths. I could start a specialized consulting practice, focused on helping women protect their financial interests during divorce proceedings. My combination of business expertise and hard-won personal experience would be invaluable to women who were facing the kind of systematic financial manipulation I had endured. By the end of my second week in Paris, I had transformed from a woman who had been abandoned and betrayed into a woman who was actively architecting her future. Timothy's attempt to destroy me had inadvertently liberated me from a marriage that was constraining my growth and happiness. My phone, which I had kept turned off for days, buzzed back to life with dozens of missed messages when I finally powered it on during my third week in Paris. Most were from my attorney, but there were also messages from Agent Rodriguez, Samantha Wells from the Chicago Tribune, and surprisingly, several other women I didn't recognize. The first call I returned was to my lawyer, Patricia Morrison from Morrison Hartley and Associates. "Summer, thank God you're reachable. You need to know what's been happening here in Chicago." Patricia's voice was filled with barely contained excitement. "The FBI arrested Timothy and Hannah yesterday morning." I sat down on my suite sofa, processing this information. Both of them. Yes. Turns out Hannah was more involved in the conspiracy than anyone realized. She had been recruiting other women to participate as accomplices, convincing them to seduce married men and help extract their assets. Patricia paused, letting this sink in. She wasn't just Timothy's victim, Summer. She was a co-conspirator. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All this time I had thought of Hannah as misguided, perhaps naive about Timothy's criminal activities. But she had been an active participant in what was essentially an organized crime ring. How many others were there? At least 12 women across 7 states. The FBI is calling it one of the largest spousal fraud networks they've ever uncovered. Patricia's voice grew grim. Some of these women were specifically targeting high-earning wives, just like Timothy targeted you. It was a coordinated effort. I walked to the balcony, needing fresh air as I absorbed the magnitude of what had been happening. What are the charges? Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, racketeering, the works. Timothy is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison if convicted. Hannah could face similar time. Patricia paused. Your evidence was crucial, Summer. Without your documentation and the emails you provided, they never would have been able to build such a comprehensive case. What about the other victims? That's why those women have been calling you. Word spread about how you exposed the network, and wives who suspected they were being victimized have been reaching out for advice. Patricia's tone became hopeful. Several of them are interested in hiring our firm to represent them in divorce proceedings and potential criminal cases against their husbands. Over the next hour, Patricia filled me in on the complete collapse of Timothy's world. His arrest had been front-page news not just in Chicago but nationally, as the story of the spousal fraud network captured public attention. His former employer had issued a statement distancing themselves from his actions. His mother had given an interview to a local news station expressing her complete shock and disappointment. Most satisfying of all, Carter and Aaron were facing their own legal consequences. Carter's financial firm was under investigation by multiple regulatory bodies, and several clients were filing civil suits. Aaron had been disbarred and was facing criminal charges in 4 different states. After hanging up with Patricia, I listened to several voicemails from women who had been victimized by the network. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to mine: husbands who had grown distant, unexplained financial irregularities, sudden business trips that made no sense. But unlike me, most of these women had been left truly devastated financially when their husbands disappeared. One message particularly moved me. It was from Jennifer Webb, the ex-wife of Marcus Webb, one of Timothy's co-conspirators. "Mrs. McCullen, my name is Jennifer Webb. My husband disappeared 8 months ago with our entire savings, leaving me and my 3 children with nothing. I've been working 3 jobs just to keep our apartment, and I had no idea how to fight back legally until I read about your case in the newspaper. Would you be willing to talk with me? I think you might be the only person who truly understands what I'm going through." I called Jennifer back immediately, and we spoke for over an hour. Her story was devastating. Marcus had systematically drained their accounts, sold their house without her knowledge using forged documents, and disappeared to the Cayman Islands with his accomplice. Jennifer had been too overwhelmed and financially stressed to hire proper legal representation. "I kept thinking I must have done something wrong," Jennifer said through tears. "Maybe I was a bad wife. Maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. The isolation was almost worse than the financial devastation." "You did nothing wrong," I told her firmly. "These men are sophisticated criminals who planned their attacks carefully. The fact that you trusted your husband doesn't make you naive, it makes you a normal person who expected basic honesty in your marriage." By the end of our conversation, I had offered to help Jennifer connect with legal resources and potentially cover some of her attorney fees. Her situation crystallized the idea that had been forming in my mind since arriving in Paris. That evening, as I sat in my favorite café in Saint-Germain, I began sketching out a business plan for something I was calling the Phoenix Foundation. It would be a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women recover from sophisticated financial fraud perpetrated by their spouses. We would provide legal assistance, financial planning, emotional support, and most importantly, the knowledge and resources needed to fight back effectively. The irony was perfect. Timothy's attempt to destroy my life had instead inspired me to help dozens of other women rebuild theirs. My final week in Paris was bittersweet. I had grown to love the rhythm of my days there: the morning walks along the Seine, the long afternoons in museums, the evening meals at small bistros, where the owners had begun to recognize me as a regular. Paris had become the place where I rediscovered myself, and leaving felt like closing a chapter I wasn't entirely ready to finish. But I was also eager to return to Chicago and begin implementing the plans I had been developing. The Phoenix Foundation was more than just an idea now. I had spent hours refining the business model, identifying potential funding sources, and connecting with legal experts who specialized in financial fraud cases. On my last morning at the Plaza Athénée, I received an unexpected call from Agent Rodriguez. "Mrs. McCullen, I wanted to update you on the case before you return to Chicago," he said. "Timothy and Hannah both decided to accept plea bargains rather than go to trial." "What kind of plea bargains?" "Timothy will serve 12 years in federal prison and pay full restitution to all victims. Hannah got 8 years and similar restitution requirements." Agent Rodriguez paused. "Your evidence was so comprehensive that they really had no choice but to accept responsibility." I felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction that justice was being served, but also a strange sadness for the people Timothy and Hannah might have been if they had made different choices. What about the other co-conspirators? Carter and Aaron are negotiating their own pleas. The entire network is collapsing, and we're confident we'll be able to recover most of the stolen assets for the victims. His voice became more personal. Mrs. McCullen, I want you to know that your courage in coming forward and your meticulous documentation made this entire investigation possible. You've helped us prevent dozens of other women from being victimized. After the call ended, I packed my new French wardrobe, clothes that reflected my authentic taste rather than what I thought a corporate wife should wear, and prepared for the journey home. As the taxi carried me through Paris one last time, I felt profound gratitude for what the city had given me, not just luxury and culture, but the space and time to remember who I really was. The flight back to Chicago was nothing like the anxious journey I had taken 3 weeks earlier. I flew first class on my own ticket, using miles I had accumulated from my consulting travel. No one was meeting me at the airport, and I preferred it that way. This return was about my independence, not about anyone else's expectations or convenience. Walking through O'Hare, I thought about how different everything felt from that morning when Timothy had abandoned me at Charles de Gaulle. Then I had been a woman whose husband was systematically betraying her, though I didn't yet know the full extent of his deception. Now I was a woman who had turned that betrayal into the foundation for a new life purpose. My house felt strange when I first walked through the door. It still contained all the compromises Timothy and I had made in our decorating choices, all the wedding photos and shared memories that now felt tainted by his betrayal. But instead of feeling sad, I felt energized by the prospect of transformation. I spent my first evening home making lists: rooms to redecorate, photos to remove, furniture to replace. I wanted to create a space that reflected my taste and values, not the aesthetic compromises of a failed marriage. The process felt therapeutic rather than melancholy. The next morning, I met with Patricia Morrison to finalize the divorce proceedings. Timothy had signed all the paperwork from prison, accepting the terms without contest. Given his criminal conviction and the fraud he had perpetrated against me, the divorce was straightforward. I kept everything that was mine, and he kept his debt and legal problems. You know, Patricia said, as we reviewed the final documents, I've been practicing family law for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone turn a situation like this around so completely. Most women in your position end up devastated financially and emotionally. You've somehow managed to come out stronger than before. I had advantages, I replied. Financial resources, professional skills, and a support network. Most women facing spousal fraud don't have those things, which is exactly why I want to help them. That afternoon, I had my first official meeting with Jennifer Webb and 2 other women who had been victimized by the network. We gathered in my dining room, soon to be redecorated, to discuss the practical steps for launching the Phoenix Foundation. The name says everything, Jennifer said, looking at my preliminary business plan. Rising from the ashes of what was destroyed to become something stronger. Exactly. And the beautiful thing is that we already have our first success story, I said, gesturing to myself. We know it's possible to not just survive this kind of betrayal, but to transform it into something meaningful. Over the following weeks, the Phoenix Foundation began to take shape. I used a portion of my inheritance to establish the initial funding, and within a month we had our first office space and had hired 2 staff members, a victim advocate and a financial counselor. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful: to provide women with the resources, knowledge, and support they needed to protect themselves from financial fraud and rebuild their lives after betrayal. We offered legal referrals, financial planning assistance, emotional support groups, and most importantly, education about recognizing and documenting suspicious financial activity. Timothy had tried to make me a victim, but instead, he had created an advocate for justice. 6 months after returning from Paris, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined during those dark days of discovering Timothy's betrayal. The Phoenix Foundation had grown from a concept sketched in a Parisian cafe to a thriving organization that was making a real difference in women's lives across the Midwest. Our first major success story came when we helped Linda Chen, David Chen's abandoned wife, recover over $400,000 in assets that her husband had tried to hide in offshore accounts. Using the same investigative techniques I had developed to expose Timothy's network, our team was able to trace David's financial movements and provide law enforcement with the evidence they needed to freeze his accounts and force repatriation of the stolen funds. "I never thought I'd see that money again," Linda told me during our celebration dinner. "When David disappeared, I felt so stupid for trusting him. But working with the Phoenix Foundation taught me that intelligence and preparation are our best weapons against this kind of betrayal." The foundation had also begun offering workshops for women who wanted to protect themselves proactively. Financial Self-Defense for Modern Women became our most popular program, teaching participants how to maintain independent financial records, recognize warning signs of asset manipulation, and document suspicious activities. These workshops filled quickly, often with waiting lists of women who had heard about our work through word of mouth. Many participants were happily married but wanted to ensure they could protect themselves if the unthinkable happened. Others came because they were already noticing concerning patterns in their husband's behavior. "You're not teaching us to distrust our spouses," one participant said during a workshop evaluation. "You're teaching us to trust ourselves and our instincts. That's completely different, and it's empowering rather than paranoid." My consulting business had also evolved. I still maintained my partnership at Morrison & Associates, but I had developed a specialty in forensic financial analysis for divorce cases. Law firms across the region were referring complex cases to me, particularly those involving sophisticated attempts to hide assets. The combination of my business background and personal experience made me uniquely qualified to identify the kinds of financial manipulation I had experienced firsthand. I could spot the patterns because I had lived through them. One particularly satisfying case involved helping a client named Sarah Turner, no relation to Aaron Turner thankfully, whose husband had been systematically draining their business accounts while claiming the company was struggling financially. Using techniques I had perfected while investigating Timothy, I was able to prove that her husband had been diverting profits to personal accounts while crying poverty during divorce negotiations. He kept telling me I was being unreasonable to expect any significant settlement, because the business was barely breaking even. Sarah told me after we exposed his deception. Meanwhile, he had moved over $2 million into accounts I didn't know existed. The personal satisfaction of helping women like Sarah, Linda, and Jennifer was immense, but I was also building something larger than individual case victories. The Phoenix Foundation was creating a model that could be replicated in other cities, helping women nationwide recognize and respond to financial abuse. We had established partnerships with women's shelters, legal aid organizations, and financial planning firms. The network was growing organically as success stories spread and more professionals learned about our approach. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was in my personal life. I had not only survived Timothy's betrayal, I had used it as a catalyst for creating something far more purposeful than our marriage had ever been. The house I once shared with Timothy had been completely renovated to reflect my taste and values. The formal dining room where we had hosted dinner parties designed to advance Timothy's career became a comfortable meeting space for Phoenix Foundation support groups. The home office where I had first discovered his betrayal was now a bright, inspiring workspace where I planned strategies to help other women. I had also begun dating again, though carefully and on my own terms. Unlike my relationship with Timothy, which had developed during my 20s when I was still figuring out my own identity, I now knew exactly who I was and what I wanted in a partner. The man I was seeing, David Morrison, Patricia's brother and a fellow entrepreneur, understood my mission and respected my independence. He had watched his sister handle difficult divorce cases for years and had tremendous respect for women who rebuilt their lives after betrayal. "You're not damaged by what Timothy did to you," David had told me early in our relationship. "You're refined by it, like gold that's been through fire and come out purer and stronger." Most importantly, I had learned to trust my instincts completely. The subtle warning signs I had ignored during my marriage with Timothy were now impossible to miss. I would never again dismiss my intuition or make myself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. The woman who had been abandoned at Charles de Gaulle Airport had discovered that she didn't need rescuing, she needed unleashing. And once unleashed, she had become a force for justice that Timothy never could have imagined. 1 year after Timothy abandoned me in Paris, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address showed it was from the Federal Correctional Institution where Timothy was serving his sentence. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten on standard prison stationery, Timothy's familiar script looking smaller and more cramped than I remembered. "Dear Summer," it began. "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't read this letter, but I wanted you to know that I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I finally understand the magnitude of how wrong I was. It wasn't just the financial fraud or the affair, it was the fundamental disrespect I showed for who you are as a person. I convinced myself that you were dependent on me, that you needed me to manage your life, when the truth is that you were always the stronger, more capable person in our marriage. I've been following news about the Phoenix Foundation from prison. The other inmates think I'm crazy for reading articles about the organization founded by the woman I betrayed, but I'm proud of what you've built. It's exactly the kind of thing you would do, turn something terrible into something that helps people. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. I'm not asking you to visit or respond to this letter. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry it took losing you for me to understand how extraordinary you really are." I set the letter aside and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden I had planted that spring. The roses were in full bloom, varieties I had chosen based on my own preferences rather than what would look good to neighbors or guests. Timothy's apology felt genuine, but it also felt irrelevant. The woman he was apologizing to, the woman who had been hurt and blindsided by his betrayal, no longer existed. I had become someone entirely different through the process of rebuilding my life. That afternoon, I was scheduled to speak at a conference for divorce attorneys about recognizing financial fraud patterns. These speaking engagements had become a regular part of my work, and I genuinely enjoyed sharing knowledge that could help legal professionals better serve their clients. As I prepared my presentation, I reflected on how much my perspective had shifted. A year ago, I had been focused on revenge and justice for Timothy's betrayal. Now I was focused on prevention and empowerment for future victims. The conference went well, and afterward, a young attorney approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Fraser," she said, "I had reclaimed my maiden name as part of my post-divorce identity. I think my own sister might be in a situation like what you described. Her husband has been acting suspicious about money, and she's been making excuses for him that sound exactly like the patterns you outlined." We talked for 20 minutes about warning signs and resources, and I gave her materials about the Phoenix Foundation's services. Conversations like this happened regularly now, and each one reinforced my sense of purpose. That evening, I had dinner with David at our favorite restaurant, a small Italian place in Lincoln Park that we had discovered together, with no connection to my previous life with Timothy. Over wine and pasta, I told him about Timothy's letter. "How did it make you feel?" David asked, his question free of judgment or expectation. "Relieved, actually," I said, surprising myself with the answer. For months after everything happened, I wondered if Timothy truly understood what he had done, or if he was just sorry he got caught. The letter suggests he finally grasps the real impact of his choices. Does that change anything for you? I thought about it for a moment. No, it doesn't change anything about my life or my future, but it does close a psychological loop. I'm not carrying around anger about his lack of understanding anymore. 3 weeks later, I was back in Paris for the first time since my transformative solo trip. This time, I was there with David for a genuine vacation. No hidden agendas, no deception, no elaborate schemes, just two people who enjoyed each other's company, exploring a beautiful city together. We stayed at a different hotel, ate at different restaurants, and visited different sites than Timothy and I had originally planned. I wanted this Paris experience to be completely separate from the previous one, though I did take David to the café in Saint-Germain, where I had first sketched out the idea for the Phoenix Foundation. "This is where it all started," I told him, showing him the table where I had sat with my notebook, planning my future while watching Parisians go about their daily lives. "Not where it all started," David corrected gently. "Where it all began again. The real start was when you decided not to let Timothy's betrayal define your future. As we walked along the Seine that evening, I realized that David was right. Timothy's abandonment had been an ending, but it had also been a beginning. The woman who had been left at Charles de Gaulle Airport had died that day, and the woman who had emerged from the ashes was stronger, wiser, and more authentically herself than she had ever been before. The circle was complete, but the journey was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass.